We're going to be working on section 16 tonight. You see the topic is MVC validation. Let's begin by talking a little bit about one of the core principles of doing MVC. So at the beginning of the course, I think we talked about this a little bit, but often when you read about MVC, at least in principle, they often mention what they call the dry principle, and you can see what that stands for, which is don't repeat yourself. And really that's kind of the whole architecture of MVC, is that separation of concerns where we separate the views from all the other components, and really allowing you to custom tweak any one of those particular things. But they mention it here because it actually applies pretty well to some of the validation techniques that we're about to explore. Now, validation, when you're working with any type of a language or structure, is a very key thing when interacting with users. Of course, you're grabbing information from the user. You want to make sure, especially when you're starting to slap it into a database, that it's not going to crash your database. Databases, of course, have a layer of validation of their own, in a sense, in that the fields and the tables that you're inserting information into have data types attributed to them, and if you're not feeding the right type of information, the database will respond with an error message. That's kind of problematic though when you're writing an application, because often that response from the database will cause an exception to your application and literally halt the application. So the whole point of trying to do validation on the front end or the back end with code, which would be the case here since we're going to be doing it with C#, is to prevent the database from having to choke on something and crash the application. All right. So some of the basic types of ways to do validation are the ones that you see listed here. So for example, some fields will be required. Like, for example, you might require a person's name. You might have limitations as to how long a string might be or how large a number might be, that type of thing. You also might validate against a regular expression. So for example, if you remember what a regular expression is, that's where you set up a pattern that users can try to fit into. So for example, if you were asking somebody for an email address, you might set up a regular expression that would make sure that, for example, the @ sign's in there, and that after the @ sign, there's like some text and then dot something, like a .com or whatever the top level domain is. The range one also, where you're expecting to get maybe like a numeric value within a certain range, and somebody, it's like typing in, birth date and they're putting in like 500, or, years of age, that's not going to be the case. So you might have validation related to that as well. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to continue the work from the previous section. So if you got the database chapter working, which I hope you did, you're going to bring that up right now, and I'm going to have to relaunch Visual Studio and then open up the simple app, which I've been working on. It just happens to be right there, so why not? And they do want us, they did say the employee controller, no, the employee class. So we don't want the controller, we actually want this file here. And we're going to start making some tweaks to this. So I'm going to actually probably shuffle off this PDF to the other screen here, as is pretty typical. You guys are getting used to this with me now, I would think. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a couple tweaks, and it says let's update the employee class by adding different annotation attributes as shown in the following code. So I'm going to start scrolling through here real carefully and doing a little side-by-side checking. All right, and you can see where the changes are basically, all right, so I'm seeing what they're doing now. All right, so in the example, they're adding these annotations. So inside of square brackets, we're going to do string length, and then in parens, 60 and then minimum, if I can type that, isn't that great, minimum length equals 3, close your parens, and that B1 that's added after the name, and here we're going to put in display, and that should be a square bracket, not a curly. I did it again. One of these times I'll get it right. Add another one right below it. This one is data type. Yes, I could have copy pasted this, I suppose. But I thought it'd be brave and type it in. Give you guys a chance to catch up. More square brackets. This one will be display format. Data format string. And here's where we actually see, I guess, a little bit of a regular expression inside of curlies. And I always kind of mention to my students that a lot of these regular expressions and these types of input masks is really what I like to think of them as. It's almost a whole field of study in itself with some of the complexity that's available. Spell that right for sure. So you should have something that looks like this. Right below date and time. And if I'm actually to arrange this the way they have it in the document, which might actually be pertinent to do it like this, because then the things are attributed to the thing they're going with. And I want you to notice something about this. If you think about validation that you guys have done in other languages and some of the techniques that you learned for doing it, and then you look at this like C#, like modern approach, how cool and simple it is, really. Sure, there's a syntax to learn, a little different format, but I mean, conceptually, it's very easy to read it and kind of guess as to what's going on without thinking too much. Apparently, they don't want anybody over 60. Okay, but that's what it is. Now, if you guys are noticing that everything is underlining red, a lot of that is because there's actually a system library that we did not add. And I'm wondering if it's going to auto-suggest the right one. So system component model data annotations is the one that we want to use. So I'm just going to go ahead and click that and add it. Now all the underlines are gone. So you guys have that? I'm hoping so. All right, so if you were successful with that, now it says we need to set limits to the database. However, I'm getting some head shaking here. We're just saying don't worry about it, I think, right? Okay, and I'm sorry about that little glitch there, but we were talking about setting limits to the database, and I had some people that were having issues finding there, so I had to pause here for a moment, but now I'm back. And what we need to do is we need to go into the SQL Server Object Explorer, and normally we'll be in the Solution Explorer view, And I have mine here in the sidebar. You might even have yours on the opposite side. And if you don't see it, then you can come up here and go to the view menu and then actually find it on the list here to bring it up. So bring that tool up, and regardless of where it sits on your screen, it's pretty irrelevant. And what I'm going to suggest that you guys do is maybe collapse all of your trees and then hit the refresh. Now, if you guys remember from your advanced databases class, or if you've had that class, you should have at this point, that a lot of times when you would make changes in the database equivalent, the Explorer tool there, often you'd have to hit refresh for it to see the changes. It doesn't automatically refresh. It's just a quirk of databases. And you sure should be found within the one that's named MS SQL Local DB, etc. Expand the Databases tab, and then you should see MVC Simple App here. If you expand that, you should be able to go to your tables and get to that employee table. And then if you right-click that table, you should be able to do properties on it. Let's see if that pulls up. Why do I sound like so pensive, like it's not going to happen, right? But maybe actually viewing the data isn't a bad place to start. So we can at least look at it, right? So you can see all the stuff that's already in your application. Now, of course, you can close that, go back to the Object Explorer, and then what we need to do is set the property. But you see how I'm like having an issue getting there. So I'm actually going to force a refresh here. And I know that seems a little simple, but I think that that's helpful. So I'm going to actually click on the View Designer tool, and then we'll get into the screen that we need to go to. So what they're having us try to do here is that the name property is set to max, as seen in the following screenshot. Now, what that exactly means is how much information can go in there before it basically fills the field. What would you guess that this means? Whatever the limitation is for this tool or operating system or memory or whatever. And I don't know if that's necessarily a smart thing there. All right. Now it says to set this limitation on the database, we need to use migrations to update the schema. Now, those of you that were in my Ruby on Rails class, the word migration should sound like a familiar term, right? And what that is we make a change to the structure of the database, and then in order for that structure change to stick, we have to run the migration to actually alter the database structure. You can't just kind of like tweak it on the fly and expect it to work. You have to kind of like build it back into the application. So what needs to happen for that is we actually have to add a tool that allows us to do that. So we need to get the Nougat package manager going. So we need to go back to our tools up here. Yes, you can get to it from Solution Explorer, but we are in the database view right now. So we're going to go to the tools, and then we're going to go to the Nougat package manager, and then we're going to choose package manager console. So we're going to actually do this on a command line level. And if you notice, like as that was loading up, it's really running PowerShell in the background. So it's just bringing up a command prompt right inside the environment, basically. All right. So they're going to give us a number of commands to enter in, and we want to enter them in one by one. Okay? So watch what I do here. I'm going to type enable dash migrations. Press enter. Then we want to throw in as soon as it's done. I'm trying to be patient. I guess I'm being a little impatient, I suppose. All right, and then it's a detected database created with database initializer, scaffolded migration, initial create, corresponding to existing database. Use an automatic migration instead. Delete the migration folder, rerun enable migration, and specify a different parameter. Okay. I'm not really concerned about that, frankly. All right. Let's add the migration, which is the next step. And if this fails, then we know that we have to go back and do the step that they're talking about. So the command is add-migration space data annotations. Press enter. All right, and then you see that it came back with a message, scaffolding migration data annotations. All right. Next command is update database. Now, this is the command that actually writes the changes to the database. Press enter. Okay, so now you see the response from that one. And you see, and I could have added the verbose flag to it to view the SQL statements being applied to the target database. So that's really what's happening in the background. But it is applying the migrations, and then it's running the seed method to push the data back into the database after the migrations happen. Hopefully you guys had the same results as I did. And if you look at the screen in the PDF, it does show you that the messages that we were getting are actually normal. So my output looks the same as the author's, which is good. Very good. The next little thing that he types up here, and we're now on page 131, right in the middle below the image and just above the code, he says, Visual Studio will also open the class, which is derived from the DB migration class, in which you see the code that updates the schema constraints in up method. All right, so what they're referring to is this file up here, and you can see the long name that just happens to match the ones in the migrations. I'm going to go ahead and close the package console window at this point. We can always bring it back if we need it. And then notice what it puts in here. It says alter column, max length 60, and then alter the column here for name to run a different method. Why? Now the why for that is take a look at the changes that we made to the employee class, right? Because we did set a limit here of 60 characters. Are you guys seeing that? So those changes that we're putting in. So really here we're changing the structure of the data that we're working with. The application recognizes it. And then when we run the migration, it takes that and automatically adjusts the database structure. Now, if you look back at the annotations file and do a comparison with the changes, hopefully the changes that they list on this page here on 131 are matching up with what you have on your screen. And for me, they do, so hopefully they do for you as well. I'm on to page 132 now. And what they want you to do is go back to the SQL Server Object Explorer and then take a look again at a table. And what you really want to do here is you probably actually want to close this and reopen it. In fact, I would actually encourage you to hit a refresh on the database and then re-explore the tree to get to where you're going, just like this. Let's view it in the designer. Are you noticing right now under the name column how the data type, instead of being set to max now, is set to 60, right where my pointer is? So that's how you know that you basically altered the database by dropping in that square bracketed code. So really what we're doing is we're tweaking the model in the code, running the migration, which changes the database. So what that does, for programmers, it really is allowing us to not have to sit there and write SQL statements or go into, the database and write the code. Now, of course, some database purists would say that's a better way to do it. I don't agree. I think that this is kind of a neat way to adjust that stuff. And pretty powerful, really. All right. At this point, at the very bottom of page 132, they want us to run the application again. And this time, they want us to go to employees/create. So let's just get this to launch. Of course, we know that we have to type the URL in. It'll probably come up with an error screen. That's pretty normal. Suppose we could have wrote an index route to stop that from happening. And go to employee create. And then they want us to try entering invalid data. So I'll put my name in there. And then for the joining date, are you guys noticing what's happening in the joining date? How that format that we've declared is now sticking? And I don't know if you're trying this like I am, but you can actually use your up-down arrow keys to change the numbers once you're in one of the particular fields. That is really neat, isn't it? The interesting thing is what they're showing us in the example is that we should try to type text in here. Right. Isn't that great? So you're trying to do it. Now I'm leaving age out of there, but age is required. And what it should do is it should pop back a message saying it's required. Or, if I put in an age and I put in some letters, it won't let me do that either. Notice that? Right. So I have to put in a number. But let's try leaving the name blank now. Oh, it allowed us blank name. So apparently we didn't have that as a requirement. We better edit it and put in a name. Nobody. How about that? Oh, that's right, because we did have a limitation for the age. So if we try to, well, I suppose we could type 65. Right, no old people need apply. But 60 is fine. And I suppose you could try taking one of these and making it under 22. See what it does. What was interesting about that is, I preset this one before the limitation was in, so it allowed the value. But it didn't delete it. Notice that? All right. So if you got it to work like this, you got the validation to work. And I think, really, when you stop and think about this validation technique, and I know it's a simplistic example, I get that, but when you see the approach to it and how much easier that is, and not only that not only can we set validation this way, we can also run migrations on the database by doing this. This is a code-first approach, you guys. And then the other thing that I think is an important takeaway is that when you run this validation code, really the tool that's running in the background that's making it happen, as the book indicates, is jQuery. So it's really the jQuery validation tools that are being triggered, but we have a special set of short codes that are inside those square brackets that trigger it directly from the C#. All right, folks, that ends this video, and hopefully you guys were successful like we were, and we'll see you in the next video.